I'm going to talk to you about CarPlay, and yeah, this is going to be fun, at least it is for me, so I hope it is for you as well. And it's CarPlay for parking apps. A little bit about me. My name is Peelen. I'm originally Dutch, but I've lived here now for 21 years, so I have a kind of an identity crisis now, longer in Sweden than the Netherlands. I'm an iOS developer since 2009, about. Worked on over 30 apps. I stopped counting at 30. I thought that was enough to count to. I love gadgets, hence CarPlay comes really good in place here as well. EasyPark, I've been here for about 2 years now. My Twitter handle, or whatever you want to call it, Peelen, and you can find me also at paulpeelen.com. So CarPlay is an Apple standard that enables a car radio or head unit to be a display and a controller for an iOS device. It's available for all iOS models beginning with iPhone 5 and running iOS 7.1 and later. This is the Apple's description of what CarPlay is. I'm going to walk you through that, through these topics. Starting off with the basics, some hardware after that. Then I'm going to show you how to set up CarPlay so you can get started as well. We're going to build a really quick and simple example app, and then I'm going to share you some learnings that we did, both for EasyPark in general, but as well as for development. So let's start off with the basics. A good thing to know for those that are experienced with extensions in iOS, that CarPlay is not an extension. It lives in the main app and it uses the main resources. So if you are in your car, and if we take the EasyPark app as an example, you start the EasyPark app on CarPlay, you start it on your device as well, and vice versa. It is very limited in functionality. It uses different categories for different purposes. So there are different categories for parking, food ordering, EV, navigation, audio, etc. I think there are about 7 categories to choose from when developing CarPlay. These limit the functionality as well. CarPlay framework provides the templates objects to configure the content of your CarPlay device, or a CarPlay app, sorry. This is combined then again with these categories. CarPlay works for touch-based and non-touch-based head units. Come back to that later, and there's really no UI needed. So if you don't like working with UX or UI designers, which I hope you don't, I hope you do like working with them, then this is maybe heaven then for you, because there is no UI. Apple decides on how it's going to look. You define this in the templates. So a little bit behind the scenes how CarPlay works. So when a CarPlay session begins, the iPhone and the head unit communicate using different communication protocols. So the CarPlay UI is decided on the device and is sent over an 862 and a 64 stream to the head unit. So everything is done on device. Nothing is in the car. There's no software installed in the car for that. It's a communication in there in between. And then it uses the input and communication protocols in there in between. So in short, it's kind of like an external screen to your phone. It's like the projector is an external screen to my Mac. My Mac decides what the projector is going to show. And it's the same way we work with CarPlay. Here are a few examples of CarPlay head units. On your top left there, we have a Volvo XC90, which has a touch-based CarPlay unit. You can swipe on it, you can touch the different icons, and you can scroll through lists that are on there. And to your right, the 3 images here, that's a BMW i3, which does not have a touch screen, but you control that instead with the scroll wheel that's in between the front seats. Little off topic here, the top right screen is a little bit cheating though, because when you got the car from the factory, that is not possible. For some reason, they shrink the screen to like a normal, I think it's 800 by 600 screen size, like the small screen in the middle. But there is ways you can go about and actually get it to full screen as well. And it's actually good to know that there are different ways of handling CarPlay with touch-based as well with the scroll wheel. So set up CarPlay. There are a few requirements in order to get started with CarPlay. First, you need to make sure that you have the correct entitlement in your app and that you have the scene delegate set up in your info plist. So the correct entitlement, you decide which category your app is going to be working with CarPlay. The scene delegate is just for the app to tell that, okay, this is the scene delegate I'm going to call whenever we're launching the app. The second is, if you want to release your app, which I presume you would like to, you will need approval from Apple. And you will add this to your provisioning profile then as well. And the third one, it's not really a requirement, but I think it's very good to tinker with this as well. It's in the simulator, you need to add extra setup. You need to enable that. And I'll come back to that as well. Yeah. So, categories. Here we have an example of the categories: the audio communication, EV charging, navigation, parking, and quick food ordering. Those are the categories that are currently available within CarPlay, and these gives access to the different templates that are available within the app as well. So, for instance, in our case, we have parking. We have access to the action sheet, the alert, grid, information, and list, as well as the point of interest and tab bar. But an audio app doesn't have access to the action sheet, for instance. And these templates are, so to say, they're code objects that you define, that you call in your app, and then you send the metadata that is required for this template to the template, and then CarPlay will manage the presenting of it, how many lines are visible, how the text will look, all the things like that. The only thing that you can decide when it comes UI-wise is which icon you want to use in some cases. So approval from Apple. Your team agent can go into developer.apple.com/CarPlay, and on the bottom right, we'll see this little bubble with contact us. You can go in there, you log in with your Apple ID, the team agent, and can make its case to Apple basically, and get Apple to, or request Apple to approve your app to have support for CarPlay. And when Apple has approved it, you get this cute little select box on your create provisioning profile or edit profile page in Developer Console, where you can select your entitlement. A good thing to know is that an app can only have one category you apply for. So if you apply for parking and get approved, you cannot have navigation later on as well. So you can only have one category. At least that's how it is today. And then the third one was the extra setup. So here we have two defaults that you can run. The first one, I don't think you need this anymore. Actually, in older versions of Xcode, you had to enable the CarPlay option in the menu in the simulator. I think in Xcode 13 this is actually enabled by default, but if you're on an older version, or if I would be wrong, that's the command that you need to write to enable it. And if you want the extended setup, then this is the second default change you can apply. And you get this little window, the TV out extending setup, where you can define the size of your CarPlay screen. If you want back buttons in there, the hardware buttons simulated in the simulator as well. And I think, it's really good to have that. Although simulators, they have bugs quite a lot, especially for CarPlay. So hardware. When we started at EasyPark implementing the parking, the parking app for CarPlay, we started just after DubDub in 2020, when actually the categories were released. And that's badass. And working with badass is interesting, in lack of other words. APIs changed overnight. I mean, I think many of you must have been have touched this as well with different badasses. And API changed overnight, simulators stop working, or they crash, or it's in the middle of July with half of Sweden closed. I got enough, and I found a shop that opened up, and I could buy a head unit. I was very happy with it because the simulator didn't work anymore, and it was very difficult developing. And after a lot of tinkering about with this one, I drove straight off to Shell & Company and bought some adapters and some plugs and everything I needed. And then I went on to Facebook to a 3D printing group. And this is the result, and I actually have that one here as well. Our cute little CarPlay setup, where we can test upon. Doesn't have speakers though, before you ask. No, it does not have speakers, but we're not going to listen to music on it. So yeah, this is the end result that we built at the time, and it's also a little bit more ergonomic because sitting at a desk with a vertical screen next to you and trying to touch these icons, your hands hurt after a while. But this made it a little bit easier. Yeah, so I can really recommend that if you're going to do a CarPlay, buy a head unit and do this. It's worth it, especially when developing and having simulators that not really work as well. So let's build an example app. So right here we have a really quick app. Let's put this on iPhone 8, that's okay. It's a really simple app, has basically one view, simple Swift UI app here. For some reason, my simulator always goes to Swedish, even though my whole Mac is in English. There we go. We have a simple app here. It just shows a bunch of pins on a map, all out over Stockholm. Doesn't really show anymore. I mean, the list is just a hello world. So this is our little app. But it's not about this. It's about our CarPlay. So let's open our CarPlay window here as well. And here we have CarPlay. There is no Parking Play app, which this demo app is called. We can scroll about here. It's not there. So let's enable that first. So let's start off with going to our entitlement and let's enable the right category. So I'm adding here com.apple.developer.carplay-parking for the parking category. And then on top of that, we want our info plist. We want to add the application scene manifest here. And this is a Swift UI app, so we only have one in here. There we go. So now we added those, and I can run my app after I clean my cache. And now we have a Parking Play app. But if I run this, the simulator will crash. So let's not do that. We want to be friends with our simulator. So let's go to our CarPlay scene delegate. So here we are going to implement our CarPlay UI. So let's start off with our delegate function for the car template application scene, where we get a interface controller, and the interface controller is what we use to send out these templates that we want to implement. This still doesn't really show us that much. We also want to show, well, let's start off with an information template. I know this is a lot of code at one time, but let me walk you through it real quick. We are going to use the CP information template. So there are a bunch of different templates within the CarPlay framework. CP information template, CP list template, CP grid template, a bunch of different ones. So, sorry, thank you. Thank you. There we go. Yes, so we have the CP information template here. I hope you can see it now well. Is that good enough? Yeah, great. And this one takes a title. I've set it here to CarPlay Cocoaheads. It takes a layout, which is either leading or 2 columns. I come back to that later with an example. It takes a list of items, which are CP information items. And then it can take some actions as well. So if you want to have some buttons below. And we send this template that we create here to our interface controller, to the root template with our information template, animated, and now we get a closure, completion closure here with successor and a possible error. The items that we're sending in, just a real simple one, it's CP information item that says template type, information template type. So if we run this, and we open our app. By the way, this app makes it look like it's doing a network request. It's just doing a dispatch queue async after, so it's just a delay there just to simulate the network request. But we open the CarPlay app, we get our CarPlay. So this is an information template. So the purpose, what I'm going to show you here during my coding is I want to just show you a quick list in CarPlay, and I just want to show you the points of interest template, and then maybe if we have time for it, moving on to a sub page as well. So I'm a little bit stressed on time, that's why I talk a little bit quicker here. So let's add a load content here. So we want to load our pins. No task in it here, we're fetching our pins and we're storing this to places, which I defined up here, an array of place. And now we want to add a list to this as well, and we want to show the user that we're loading content. So let's start off with that. Let's add support to our set information template with a title and a subtitle, and let's set these in our template here. So we want a title here. We don't need a title on our row, so we can remove that actually. And then we set a subtitle here. There we go, and then we take in this row back, and we load content here. So now when the CarPlay is launched, we will access load content function here. The load content will show the information template, and then it will try to fetch the places. For now, it doesn't do anything now, so we'll only see a loading pin screen. And now the simulator crashed for CarPlay. If I go back and forth here, nothing will happen. This is why we built this device. Trying it again. Opening CarPlay and our parking app, make it a little bit bigger. So we're loading pins. Pins are being loaded, please wait. So let's add a list as well. So let's do a private func here, get list template, which will return a CP list template. Let's create our template, which is a CP list template that takes a title, let's call it list. It takes an array of sections, so let's call this sections and define it in a short while. We don't need assistant cell configuration, I'm going to skip that real quick, and we're going to return this template. Then we're going to create our sections here, which uses CP list section. And the CP list section will take an array of CP list items, so we call that items. And add items, which is a list of CP list item. And this we have saved up here at row 46 to places, so let's map those to place and then return here the CP list item with a name and the details, let's say place subtitle. The detailed text, we're going to return this template here, so let's fetch the template here. I have a little bit larger fingers, there we go. And then let's also, we have a set root template up here, but let's separate that to its own function so we can reuse it. Set root template, so it basically does the same thing, it just puts it to its own function here and it takes a completion. So we do set root template to our template, we want it animated, and then we can also update this one to our info template, also animated. So we launch CarPlay, loading pins, and when loaded, we get a list. But this list is kind of boring. If we select an item, it will just give us a spinner, and it will spin indefinitely because it doesn't know what to do. Let's fix that in a short while. Let's add a points of interest real quick as well. I know you all are waiting for that one. So we make a new one, function get points of interest template, which is called points of interest template, big surprise. And we have a template, points of interest template, which takes a title, let's call this map, and it will take a list of points of interest, and and then we don't have a selected index, and we return this template as well. Then the items we need to create here, so it's the same thing as above. Let items, and we have a CP points of interest. And here so here we have a point of interest that we're going to return, and it takes a location, which is an MK map item, which is a place mark with the coordinates. And then it takes a name, a subtitle, summary, name, all the details of the points of interest. And we can also set a pin image if we like. We are not doing this right now. And we're returning it to items. Items we are setting to the points of interest template. So we want to show this here as well, but if I'm now going to replace this, then we don't have the list anymore. So we need to add a tab bar as well. The tab bar is really simple. Now let's make it set then as well. Func tab screen. We don't want to return this, and that one will have a template, which is CP tab bar template, which takes a list of templates. And we set the root template to template, animated. And the templates we want to have are templates with the CP, with the get points of interest template, and we have the get list template. There we go. Let's show this one instead. So let's remove these lines and let's do the prepared one I have here. Now when we're launching CarPlay, we'll load pins. We will have a points of interest page and we will have a list here. But just like my kids, CarPlay wants more, as it states up here. So this is really, it's just some metadata we need to set to the template. We set a tab image that we want to use, and we set a title, and it uses the UI images. That's for the list, and then we have one here for points of interest. There we go, tab map. We have the square item here and the map title that we're going to use, and if we run it now again, and we open parking play, voila, we have a map and we have a list. If we select an item here on the map, we can see the details. And as you can see, I mean, CarPlay decides on how long the titles are, how long the subtitles are, how many lines, etc. Here you can add stuff like a button below here as well. There is some space for some more metadata. We're not going to add that now. We don't really have the time for that now, but this is basically how CarPlay works there. Our list here, our spinner is still lonely here, so let's implement this spinner. We're going up to our list template, and this is also the reason why I defined my list here, because I didn't have to do it since I'm returning it. But if I'm going to change this, then the compiler will otherwise be very unhappy. So we add a handler, and a handler is a closure that returns the item that we're going to select, and a completion closure. So what happens is that when the user selects one of these rows, CarPlay gives you the possibility to do some asynchronous fetching in between. But when it is done, it would very much like to know that, okay, let me know when you're done, and then I can continue here. So it can remove the spinner and it can do its updates on the UI that is required. This is why we have the completion here. So if I implement this, well, let's say that if we select this line, we just want to come to an information template that shows the content of the item that we've selected. So let's update our set information template with a completion, which takes a closure, which is optional because we don't always need it. And set root template already had support for a completion closure. So let's just move this completion in here as well. And then when the user selects an item, we're going to do this set information template. We're going to set the title to place name. And we're going to set the subtitle to place summary. There we go. And then we're calling this completion. Oh, sorry. And we call this on self. So when we run this now, the keen people of you will know that we have a bug. We're loading, we have a list. But if I select this one now, we will have one bug. There we go. Now we have a summary page, but now we can't go back. And that works quite the same way as I think many of you are familiar with. Is we can either set a root template, like we do, for instance, on a navigation controller. We can also push to the next view. That's what we're going to do here as well. So really fast, we're going to add a enum animation type. We have a case root and a case push. And in our set information template, we're going to do add the animation type, which is an animation type. And just for the ease of it, we're going to default this to root. And here we're going to add a switch for animation type. We're setting it to root. And then we need one for push as well. Luckily, I prepared that. So we're pushing a template. It's basically the same code. Instead of that we're doing set root template, we're doing push template. And we're going to call that instead. So push template. And then when we're doing our handler here, we need to make sure that we have an animation type set to push instead. Running this, we have a list, we select an item, and now we can go back as well. So this is just a real simple app of CarPlay, and this everybody can do. You do not need approval from Apple. If you want to tinker about with it, you can set up, you can use the different categories and try it out and play with it. You have to bear with you with the simulator, but just make sure you have a cup of coffee and some patience, and it will all go great. So that is what I wanted to show you when it came to CarPlay like that. And there we go back. And this used then the templates that we were using here were the information template we were using. We have right here. We use the points of interest right here, and we use the list one, which is right there. And then there's some other things you can use as well, like action sheet, alerts, etc., etc. So this is the result that we developed when we were developing our parking app. And here, this is just a flow for a private user trying to start a parking. They will start on the location. We will check where you are. You can select the parking area on your location. You can select how long you want to park for, which vehicle you want to park with. You'll see a summary before you start the parking where you can see, okay, this is the account I'm using, the parking area, etc. You can start the parking, and when it's started, you will see the ongoing parking. And as you can see here as well, from the left one, we have a push view, and to the right one, we have the set route view, because we don't allow you to start the same parking twice. So we want to show you the ongoing parking is ongoing right now. And in this case, the actions that I showed you earlier, which you could add, this is an information template that is a two-column layout instead for leading that we were using, and it has actions as well. There's a stop action, and it has an add 15-minute action. So that brings us to our learnings for EasyPark. Well, with CarPlay, there are limitations. Like for instance, there's a 5-view depth. You are not allowed to go to a 6th view. You can only push 5 views. After that, CarPlay will get unhappy and it will crash. And this is for safety reasons, I presume, as well. So you can only have 5-view depth. And there are some other limitations there as well, UI being one of them. The CarPlay parking category is not really designed for a European market. So what you saw as well with the points of interest template, these are locations. They are put on a map, and these should represent parking areas. But for any of you that have a car and it has parked in Stockholm, Stockholm itself is one big parking area. It's taxa 3. Still, it's hard to find a parking, I know. But it's taxa 3 that we're using there, and the points of interest template doesn't support polygons. So we cannot really use that integration. We need to do it with lists. We do not have access to car peripherals. This is a question I've answered very many times when I'm talking about CarPlay, is that we do not know if you're in a car or not. We do not know if you're driving or not. We can do educated guesses, but we do not have access to CarPlay, to car peripherals, the brand of car or anything like that. This also answers the questions for people that have asked me before about if we could automatically stop your parking. No, we cannot, because we do not know when you're in a car, and we do not know when you're driving. There are a bunch of bugs in the CarPlay framework. Action sheet is one of them. So when we were developing our app, we really wanted to use the action sheet, but in iOS 14 up to 14.2, there's a bug in action sheet, which we reported to Apple. And Apple graciously took in, and they fixed this issue, which brings me to the next point. When you find bugs, report them in the feedback system. Apple does read them. It does happen. And if you have never seen that, this is what it looks like when Apple does read them and actually fixes them. So this is from the feedback assistant, where actually they didn't know about this issue, and the CarPlay team at Apple took it in, fixed it, and released a fix in 14.2. When it comes to our release from CarPlay, it was very well received on the market. A lot of tech blogs wrote about it, a lot of car blogs wrote about it as well. It was in papers as well. It was very well received, and people were very positive about this. We have a very high retention in the CarPlay app. In the beginning, people were more curious to figure out how does it work? How did EasyPark implement this? But today, users that use CarPlay, they know how and when to use it. And we have seen more and more people just coming back and using CarPlay over and over again. And we see that 75% of our users using CarPlay, they use CarPlay to find and start their parking. So they park their car, they use CarPlay, and they start their parking there. When it comes to CarPlay itself, I can't emphasize this enough. This goes in general, but especially for CarPlay 2, you need to test. And this is all fine and dandy, but you'd also need to test it in a real car. I know it's a little bit hard to go to your manager and say, hey, we need to buy this car, preferably a Mercedes, the latest one and the biggest one, of course. But you can always rent a car, or if your colleague has one, see if you can get a car with CarPlay and go about in the city to test this. And this happened. We tested this, and we tested this, and we tested this, and this is one of my cars that has CarPlay. And we drove about in Stockholm for several days, and we're in the middle of November where we thought, oh, we have quite a good app, we can release this. We were quite happy with it, and we started driving about. We found a bunch of bugs that we fixed. And this was very good because we released CarPlay in beginning of 2021, and to quote our CEO, we released CarPlay with no bugs. And this is a very dangerous thing to say, but it took half a year before we got the first bug report for CarPlay. And that wasn't even a CarPlay-related bug. That was the main app. So yeah, it does share the resources with the main app. But yeah, you need to test it. You need to really be good in testing it. So our learnings for developing, it is, like you saw, very easy to get started with. And it's fun too. I really like developing for CarPlay. It requires users to switch to device when it comes to dependencies such as permissions or paying Apple Pay and Swish payments. So some users that are using our EasyPark app with Apple Pay, for instance, they unfortunately cannot use CarPlay because we cannot do an Apple Pay transaction in CarPlay. Swish, the same thing there. Also, the first time a user downloads the app and starts up the app, the user needs to give some permissions for location, for instance. We need to know where you are if we're going to find you're parking. And this needs to be done on device. There are no system UI dialogues for that. Unless you are in a navigation app, I believe it's only the navigation app, there is no support for input. So there are no input fields where you can say, oh, I want to park at parking area 1, 2, 3, 4. That is not possible. Lists, like the ones that I showed you in the demo app, they are decided by the head unit if they are limited or not. And the head unit can decide to 12 items, or it can decide to not limit the list. So you also need to think of that when you're developing it, that the most important content is in the 12 items. And there is no code separation by default. So what we saw in the scene delegate, everything is in the same delegate. And for me, that gives me the heebie-jeebies. I don't want all my code in one big file that gets 1,200 lines of code. We want to separate this to separate classes, but you cannot subclass a CP information template, for instance. If you subclass CP information template and you tell the interface controller, hey, I want to set this as my root template, the interface controller will say, nah. It will say, you can only use these templates, only the CP information template, not my app information template. There is a way around it, and we did manage to find a code separation, which was basically separating this to a file and making a computed variable which will build the template from the contents that we've sent to it. So that is a way to do it. But it's a little bit more cumbersome. It would be nice if we can just subclass it, so to separate the code. And to use when safe. For those that have used CarPlay, maybe have noticed in EasyPark app or in Waze, for instance, if there are dialogues that require the user's attention, the first and foremost thing that you're doing on CarPlay is thinking about safety, because you're working with people that are driving, and you do not want to take their attention from driving to a head unit. So a lot of times you're using the title and information template when safe, and then a short description below. Please log into your account when appropriate, or something that indicates to the user, do it when it's appropriate and when safe. Safety comes first. And I forgot, and I wanted to show you the app as well, that it works on the device. Because we have this the CarPlay unit here. So let's real quick do that as well, because this was my last slide. So you haven't seen that one. Let's real quick go to Xcode again, and let's start the app. There we go. And if we now look here at CarPlay, and we scroll, we have parking play here. It's loading our pins. And here we have the list. And we have this list here where we can select an item and show information. And with that being said, let's go to the last one here. Thank you.